I stood by my husband's coffin, the air thick with roses and regret. My daughter-in-law's laughter broke through the silence, soft enough to sound polite, sharp enough to wound. "Such a dated dress," she whispered to her friend, eyes flicking over me like I was the joke. My hands trembled, not from grief this time, but from restraint. She thought she was mocking a widow. She didn't know she was mocking the woman who owns the house she sleeps in. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I didn't cry. Not when they lowered the casket. Not when they played Edward's favorite hymn, the one we danced to at our wedding. Not even when Andrew, our son, reached for my hand with trembling fingers that reminded me of his father's. I stood perfectly still, lips parted slightly, like I was waiting for a breath that never came. The funeral home was too warm. Too many people, too much perfume. Black wool coats brushing against one another. Whispered condolences passed around like trays of grief. And then, Olivia. I smelled her before I saw her. Chanel No. 5 and peppermint gum. She slid in beside me at the front pew like she belonged there, all legs and thin-lipped smirks. Her voice, sugary and edged in glass, dipped low against my ear. "You wore that? To Edward's funeral?" I didn't turn. I stared at the coffin. Mahogany. Gold-plated handles. Too much. Everything about Edward was too much. I felt the heat rise up my neck, felt the eyes of the congregation shift. Not openly. Just that half-turn of curiosity when something is happening and no one wants to miss it. I forced a smile. The kind my mother taught me when I was 12, and she said, "Pretty is polite, Margaret. Polite wins wars." "Manners reveal breeding, dear. Not money," I whispered back, still not looking at her. Olivia laughed, low and throaty, and leaned back in her seat like she'd scored a point. Andrew shifted beside me. He looked like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. He hadn't seen Olivia in years, hadn't seen the way she could carve you open with her compliments. The minister cleared his throat. The eulogy was next. I glanced to my left. My sister Carol was watching me with a tight mouth and wide eyes. Not concern, calculation. No one wanted me here, not really. They came for him. For Edward. The charming surgeon. The philanthropist. The man who, until 3 months ago, had a mistress in 3 states and a secret retirement fund I'd only discovered because the bank called after his stroke. He died in his sleep. Peacefully, they said. I wanted to scream that peace wasn't how he lived. Instead, I stood while they spoke. I folded my hands. I smiled when someone said, "You were lucky to have him." And then, as the eulogy began, I felt something shift. A pinprick under my breastbone. Resolve. Not rage, not sadness, just a decision clicking into place. Afterward, at the reception in the church hall, Olivia cornered me near the coffee urn. "You'll be selling the house, I assume?" she said lightly, sipping from a porcelain cup like this was a casual brunch. "It's much too big for one woman, especially with your financial situation." She didn't know I'd found the other accounts. She didn't know I wasn't leaving. I stepped closer, enough that our shoulders touched. "I'll be staying," I said calmly. "Edward left me everything." Olivia's lips curled just slightly. "He said that, did he?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because in that moment I knew exactly what Olivia was implying. And I knew I was going to find out what she knew, and why she looked so certain. Outside, the rain had started. Gentle, steady, like the kind that soaks through slowly without you noticing. Andrew touched my elbow. "Mom, there's someone asking for you." I turned. and locked eyes with a stranger standing just inside the door. Early 30s, dark coat, hands in pockets, watching me like he knew something I didn't. He gave me the smallest nod, and I felt it again. That click under the breastbone. Something had started, and I wasn't going to stop it. The front door creaked the way it always had, just slightly, on the pull. It was the sound I used to associate with Edward coming home late from the hospital, his shoes wet, his coat smelling like disinfectant and cold night air. Now, it was just me. The house felt cavernous in the quiet. Funeral flowers filled every surface, lilies, mostly, their sweetness almost oppressive. I set my clutch down on the entryway table and stood there for a moment, staring at the photo above the mantel. Edward and I on our honeymoon in Napa. His arms around me, my smile caught somewhere between camera-ready and truly happy. A thump echoed from upstairs. The HVAC, probably. But it made me flinch. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was theatrical, like the house was waiting for something. I walked past the kitchen without turning on the lights. The hallway narrowed as I approached his study. Door half open, exactly how he left it. I hesitated. His glasses were still on the desk. One arm bent, a smear of dust on the left lens. No one had touched anything. Not Carol, not the housekeeper. I stepped inside. The room smelled like paper and cedar and old cologne. His leather chair groaned under the pressure when I sat, and for a brief second I could almost hear his voice. Low, precise, slightly amused. I didn't build all this to let it rot, Maggie. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the estate folder the lawyer had handed me at the graveside reception, just before Olivia asked if I was selling the house. The seal was thick, dark green, embossed with his firm's initials. Inside, deeds, certificates, titles. Everything neat, indexed. There were 4 properties I knew about, the ones we'd acquired together. One in Tahoe, one in Vermont. The condo in Chicago he used for conferences. I ran my finger down the column of holdings, and then stopped. Langley Estate Holdings, transferred to Margaret Langley, sole owner. The folder suddenly felt heavier. That property wasn't on any of the shared accounts. It wasn't part of our retirement plan, and it wasn't one of the ones Olivia would have known about, unless she'd had access to the documents I just opened. A smile crept across my lips. Small, cold. "We'll take over the finances now," she'd said. "Will you?" I flipped to the next tab. A hand-sketched map clipped to a notarized document. Rural land, nearly 40 acres, no mortgage, bought under an LLC I'd never heard Edward mention. That click under my breastbone returned. Sharper this time. Why had he hidden this? Why leave this to me when so much else he'd tried to take away? The house creaked again, floorboards shifting above me. I didn't move. I closed the folder carefully and slid it into the drawer of the desk. Then I stood, walked back into the hallway and turned toward the stairs. Edward's closet was still full. His suits, aligned by color. The top shelf stacked with ties and boxes, untouched since the week before his stroke. There was something smug in the order of it all, as if death hadn't dared disturb the curated perfection. I pulled the closet door shut and turned away. Back downstairs, I poured myself a glass of the Barolo he'd saved for his retirement. To the left of the kitchen, Andrew's car pulled up. Headlights swept briefly across the foyer window. I didn't move to greet him. I sipped my wine. When he walked in, he paused, like the house had changed since he left it. "Mom," he said softly. "That guy. The one from the funeral. He showed up again. Said he has something you need to see." I looked up. Andrew stood there uncertain. "He's waiting outside." I put the glass down, walked past my son, opened the door. And there he was. The man from the church. Same coat. Same steady eyes. This time he spoke. "I think your husband meant for you to find me," he said. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small black envelope, and handed it to me. The invitation came folded inside a thick ivory envelope, monogrammed in navy script. Olivia still believed in stationery, the kind that whispered old money even when it screamed new husband. "Dinner," it read, "to discuss arrangements." Arrangements. Like this was a wedding and not a burial. Like Edward had left behind silverware and linens instead of a legacy soaked in secrets. I wore a black sheath dress. Simple. No jewelry, no scent. Olivia opened the door in diamonds and silk, the kind of shine that says, "I've already won." Her arms spread wide, air kiss ready. "Margaret," she purred, like I was the guest of honor at her engagement party. "You look rested." Inside, the dining room had been staged for drama. Long candles, fresh peonies, crystal cutlery. Because, of course, Andrew sat at the far end of the table, staring into his wineglass like it might offer an escape route. "Thank you for coming," Olivia said, gesturing for me to sit. "I know this is all delicate." I took my seat slowly, folding my napkin across my lap. The heat from the soup had already begun to cool. "Some things are better said face to face," she went on, pouring herself a generous glass of Bordeaux. "Especially when there are transitions happening." I didn't answer. I let her talk. Olivia always filled silence like it was her job. "We've decided," she said, turning to Andrew with the casual air of a woman discussing weekend plans, "to move into the Charleston house full-time." My spoon paused midair. Andrew's jaw twitched. He didn't look up. "The Charleston house," I repeated softly, setting my spoon back down. "Interesting?" Olivia smiled over the rim of her glass. "Edward always loved that property? Said it was special?" "I'm sure he did." She dabbed at her lips. "Of course, we'll need to do some updating. New paint. That awful tile in the sunroom needs to go." I leaned back slightly, watching her. "And you're certain," I said carefully, "that house is yours to update?" Olivia laughed. Actually laughed. Like I was being quaint. "Oh, Margaret. Come now. He told me himself. The house was meant for us. It was practically a wedding gift." I looked at Andrew then. Really looked. His hands were clenched under the table, shoulders drawn in. He hadn't known. He hadn't known about the Charleston house. He hadn't known what Edward promised to Olivia, which meant he didn't know what Edward had promised me, either. I reached for my tea. Decaf, steeped too long, and stirred it gently. "Which house exactly?" I asked, almost idly. Olivia blinked. "The one on Ravenel Drive, the big one." She waved her hand, dismissive. "You know which one I mean." I took a slow sip. Let the silence stretch just long enough to pull taut. "We'll see what the papers say," I said at last. Olivia's smile froze, just slightly. Andrew looked up then. His eyes met mine, full of questions. I gave him nothing. Not yet. The rest of the meal passed in brittle pleasantries. Olivia talked about remodeling, about travel, about how exhausting grief could be when you're the one left to manage everything. When dessert came, some kind of lemon tart she probably didn't make. I stood. "No coffee for me," I said. "It's late." Olivia walked me to the door, arms crossed like she was cold. "You can contest it," she said lightly. "But you won't win." I tilted my head. "You seem very sure of that." She leaned in. Her breath smelled like sugar and malice. "Edward made choices. Margaret. You just didn't know all of them." I didn't flinch. As I stepped outside, the wind had picked up. Crisp, like October meant it, and parked halfway down the block, beneath a flickering street lamp, was the man from the funeral, still waiting, still watching. The waiting room smelled like lemon polish and litigation. Everything in Robert Hensley's office was lacquered. The wood, the words, the smiles. Even the silence had a finish to it. Andrew sat across from me, his leg bouncing under the table. I could hear the faint tap of his shoe against the thick Persian rug. He hadn't spoken much since the dinner at Olivia's. Just texted this morning. "Can we meet with the lawyer together?" I said yes. He needed to see it in black and white. Robert adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "As executor," he said, flipping open the folder in front of him, "I've reviewed all documents pertaining to the Charleston property and Langley estate holdings." I folded my hands in my lap. Waited. Robert tapped the folder. All holdings were consolidated under Edward's revised trust. That revision, notarized and filed 4 months before his death, names you, Margaret Langley, as sole beneficiary of both the Langley estate and associated properties. Andrew let out a slow breath, and then the door slammed open. "This is a joke," Olivia snapped, her heels clicking across the hardwood like gunshots. She wore white. Again. Silk blouse, cream trousers. Too bright for the season, too sharp for the room. Robert blinked but didn't rise. "Miss Foster." "That property is mine," she said, placing both hands on the table and leaning in. "Edward gave it to me. He said it was ours. Are you telling me—" Robert didn't flinch. He merely turned the folder toward her and slid it across the table. "You're welcome to review the documents," he said. "But the property on Ravenel Drive was legally transferred into Margaret's name. I verified the deed myself." Olivia's eyes scanned the papers, her face a slow draining canvas. "No," she said softly, then louder. "No. He promised me that house. He told me." "Edward told a lot of people a lot of things," I said quietly. "But only some of those things were filed with the county." Andrew shifted in his seat. "Olivia, why didn't you tell me about any of this?" She didn't look at him. Her mouth opened, then shut. Her knuckles were white against the edge of the table. "You lied to my son," I added, voice still calm. "Manipulated him into thinking this was a done deal, that you had the right to take over a home you were never welcome in." Her head snapped toward me. "Don't you dare—" "I'm not trying to fight you," I said, standing. "I'm offering you dignity." I looked down at the folder, then at her. "You may stay in the house, temporarily, as long as you treat it, and the people connected to it, with respect." The silence cracked. "Respect?" she spat, pushing back from the table. "From you?" She stormed toward the door, stopping just short of the threshold. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Not by a long shot." The door slammed shut behind her. The room held its breath. Andrew stared down at the floor, jaw clenched, shoulders slumped in some new, complicated grief. I turned back to Robert. "Send me copies of everything, digital and hard." He nodded. "Already done." As we left, Andrew followed me to the elevator. "Why would he leave it all to you?" he asked, not accusing. "Just lost." I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my purse and touched the edge of the black envelope the stranger had handed me. Still sealed. Heavy with whatever truth Edward hadn't trusted the courts to carry. The elevator doors opened. As they closed behind us, I exhaled for the first time in days. It had begun. And I would not blink first. The call came just after dusk. The sky outside my kitchen window was the color of bruised plums, and the house smelled faintly of the lilies I still hadn't thrown away. Andrew had gone upstairs to shower. The sound of running water muffled the creaks of the old place settling. I almost didn't answer when Robert's name lit my phone. "Mrs. Langley?" His voice was clipped, formal, too formal. "I've uncovered something else in Edward's estate. It's unusual." I set down my tea. My hand left a ring of moisture on the countertop. Go on. There are several outstanding loans, nearly $200,000. They're listed under an LLC associated with Miss Foster. Olivia. The payments were coming out of joint accounts Edward held under shell entities. I closed my eyes. He covered her debts. Yes. A pause. Hidden in a way that suggests he didn't want you to know. For a moment, everything in the kitchen sharpened. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of Edward's cologne still lingering in the hall. $200,000. While I'd been juggling the mortgage and his medical bills, Olivia had been playing queen with money that wasn't hers. Edward's generosity, his arrogance, had been underwriting her life. Robert cleared his throat. Legally, those accounts are part of the estate. You control them now. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. You're saying she owes me. I'm saying, he replied carefully, that the balance of power may be different than she believes. I hung up, slowly, and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me wasn't weeping. She wasn't even shaking. She was still. Olivia had mocked me at the funeral, dangled Edward's promises like a lure, and all the while, she'd been funded by him. And now, by me. The black envelope still sat on the table where I'd left it, unopened. I traced its edge with one finger, thinking about the man in the dark coat. Upstairs, Andrew's footsteps crossed the landing. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. You'll regret embarrassing me. No punctuation. Just the threat, naked and small. I read it twice, then a third time. I typed nothing. Instead, I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was damp, carrying the smell of rain and wet earth. In the distance, a train whistle cut through the quiet, long and low. I whispered into the night, a sound no one but me would hear. Not as much as you'll regret underestimating me. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt the balance shift. It wasn't grief anymore, it was control. Control of the accounts, control of the properties, control of the debts. Olivia thought she'd buried along with my husband. A low rumble of thunder rolled over the horizon. Behind me, the house glowed warm and golden through the windows. But out here on the porch, it was cool and sharp, like standing at the edge of a new country. My phone buzzed again. A second text from Olivia. We're not finished. I smiled faintly at the screen. No, I murmured to myself. We're just beginning. Then, on impulse, I picked up the black envelope, slipped my finger under the flap. Inside wasn't paper. It was a single, heavy key on a brass ring. No note, no label. The metal felt cold against my skin, colder than the night. Somewhere, Edward had left me more than deeds and debts. Somewhere, a locked door waited. The Charleston house sat like a magazine cover, all symmetry and glass, its white columns and black shutters curated for envy. Ravenel Drive was quiet, the kind of street where everything was polished just enough to feel unnatural. The front lawn had been freshly edged, but weeds peeked through the base of the fountain, a detail Olivia hadn't noticed yet, or couldn't afford to fix. I pressed the brass knocker once, no answer. Then the door opened, and there she was. Barefoot, designer loungewear, a glass of something cold in hand, condensation sliding down her perfectly manicured fingers. Well, she said, one hip cocked against the frame. Come to inspect what's yours? I stepped inside. The air smelled like lavender and bleach, the kind of cleanliness that tries to disguise something deeper. It was beautiful, immaculate even, but too quiet. No hum from the fridge, no low buzz of air conditioning. You've done a nice job, I said, my tone mild. Edward would have liked the quiet. Olivia laughed. brittle and hollow. He liked a lot of things. She led me through the house like a realtor showing a listing she couldn't afford. The marble floors gleamed under bare feet. Artwork in expensive frames dotted the walls, the kind that looked valuable from a distance, but up close felt like copies of someone else's taste. Then I saw it. A pile of unopened mail tucked behind a silver vase in the entry console. I didn't stop walking, but I noted the electric bill stamped final notice on top. "So what is this?" Olivia asked, drifting toward the kitchen. "You play nice now that the paperwork's in your favor? Sit and sip tea like civilized women? If you'd like." I moved to the small breakfast nook. White linens, white orchids, white lies. I pulled out a chair. "I brought some of Edward's Earl Grey. Thought you might appreciate the real thing." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "You're not fooling anyone." "Who am I trying to fool?" I said, setting the tin down. "You?" The refrigerator clicked, but didn't turn on. Olivia's jaw tightened. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain slightly, then let it drop. "You're just jealous," she muttered. I watched her back, the way her shoulders rose just slightly too high. "I'm not," I said softly. "I'm patient." The lights flickered. Olivia froze. 1 beat. 2. Then the overhead fixture dimmed again. A warning pulse. We both looked up. "That storm last week," she said quickly, brushing her hair off her shoulder. "It messed with the grid. Happens out here all the time." "Of course." I stood slowly. "It's a beautiful home, Olivia. But you should know, appearances have a cost." She turned then, eyes glassy and furious. "Don't you dare lecture me. You think just because you have a signature on a deed, you've won?" "I don't think anything," I said. "I know exactly what I've inherited, and I know exactly what you've spent." Her face flushed. "You think I used him," she said, voice sharp. "But he loved me. He told me you were a cold obligation, that you bored him, that the only reason he stayed married was to keep his precious reputation intact." I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. "Then it must sting," I said, "that he left all of it, even the debts, to me." Her mouth opened, but the lights went dark again. This time, for longer. I waited. They returned in a blink, but it was long enough for the silence between us to crystallize. "I'll see myself out," I said, picking up the tea tin. "But do let me know if you need help with the utilities." As I stepped outside, the heat of the afternoon wrapped around me like a warning. Inside, the door clicked shut, and through the glass I saw her silhouette, frozen, watching. Behind her, the chandelier flickered once more, then went black. The first envelope came embossed in silver foil. Heavy cardstock. No return address, just a single line beneath my name. "In remembrance and respect." Inside was an invitation to the Langley Foundation's Fall Gala. Edward's name printed in soft black ink above the words, "In Memoriam." The second came 2 days later. Lunch at the Calhoun Club, hosted by a former colleague of Edward's from the surgical board. Then a third, a wine tasting at Broad Street Estates, where he'd once funded a children's wing no one remembered he hadn't visited since the ribbon cutting. They were invitations, yes, but they felt like tests. I could feel it in the way the phone calls ended just a second too early. The polite silences. "The how are you holding up, dear?" That was less about grief and more about curiosity. Everyone wanted to know how the real widow was holding her ground. At the Calhoun Club, 2 women whispered behind tall glasses of Prosecco as I passed. "Langley design," one said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Sunk before it launched. Shame, really. He threw so much money at it." Some said it was for love, others said it was guilt. Laughter like clinking ice. I walked past them without a word. That night, Andrew came by. He didn't knock. Just let himself in the back way like he used to in high school, sneakers thudding softly on the kitchen tile. "I saw Olivia this morning," he said, pulling out a chair. I poured tea. "She's not doing well. She's not used to being told no." He hesitated. "She's scared, Mom. Be kind." I set the teacup down, precisely. "Kindness," I said, "doesn't mean blindness." He looked away, and for the first time, I saw it. The split between loyalty and truth forming in him like a crack in porcelain. I didn't push. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Robert. "Any activity on the Ravenel property?" "A few attempts," he said. "Transfer requests. Some unusually rushed documents. But nothing that holds." "Good. Freeze everything. I don't want her changing locks or selling fixtures." "And the joint accounts?" "Remove her." A pause. "Quietly?" "Yes. Quietly." By morning, her name was gone from the accounts. The Charleston house was now just a structure with bills and shadows. Langley Design had no investors left. Just a website redirecting to a 404 error. And Edward's promises, whatever they once meant, no longer paid interest. That night, I slept. Not lightly, not restlessly, but deeply. For the first time in months, I didn't wake at 3:12 a.m., with the phantom sound of Edward's cough echoing down the hall. I didn't dream of signatures or secrets. Just quiet. But quiet never stays. At 6:44 a.m., my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low, measured, the same voice from the funeral. "There's something on the Langley property, the one he never registered in the estate. You'll want to see it." I sat up slowly, the sheet cool against my skin. "What is it?" "Not what," he said. "Who?" And the line went dead. The ballroom at the Langley Foundation's annual gala glittered like a jewelry box. Dimmed lights, gold accents, a string quartet tucked into the corner as if sorrow should have a soundtrack. This was the kind of night Olivia had always been made for. She arrived draped in sapphire silk and borrowed status. The kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she arranged herself in it. Every gesture was deliberate. The slight turn of her wrist to flash a Cartier cuff. The tilt of her chin as someone whispered her name too loudly. The bracelet wasn't hers. I knew that. So did half the women watching. "Courtesy of Bergdorf's," someone murmured behind me. "On loan for the evening." But Olivia wore it like inheritance. She clinked glasses, laughed on cue, paused for photos beside the new foundation director as if her name still held legal weight. It didn't. I stayed near the back, just far enough to observe without being absorbed. I wore a matte black column dress, clean lines, no shine, no invitation to interpretation, and then Harrison Penn found me again. That same off-kilter banker's gait, still smelling faintly of old bourbon and well-kept secrets. He leaned in with a half-smile. "Tell me something, Margaret." I waited. "Is it true," he said, lowering his voice just enough, "that the house Olivia's hosting guests in is actually yours?" I gave a polite smile, the kind bred in boarding schools and perfected at memorials. "Ownership is a matter of public record," I said. That was all. But in rooms like this, tone was currency, and silence could buy headlines. He chuckled, nodded once, and moved on. The shift was immediate. By the silent auction table, two women leaned close, one glancing toward Olivia's bare shoulder with faint amusement. A man she was speaking to, someone younger, hedge fund polished, subtly stepped back. And Olivia? She felt it. I saw the exact moment it landed, mid-laugh, her hand still gesturing toward a tray of past oysters. Her eyes flicked to the edge of the room. To me. She didn't smile, didn't look away either. A flush rose under her makeup. Her grip on the stem of her glass tightened. She turned back to her conversation partner, but her voice faltered. Just a notch. Not enough for him to notice. Enough for me. The ripple had begun. Later, during the second round of toasts, she made a hasty comment about Edward's enduring vision, but no one raised a glass. And when the lights dimmed for the memorial video, she didn't watch the screen. She watched me. Across the room, I let her. She wanted to see my reaction to her unraveling. I gave her none. Because that's what quiet ruin looks like. Not a scream, but a series of tiny losses, a pulled invitation, a revoked name, a rumor confirmed with a single glance. After the video, I left without saying goodbye. The night air outside was sharp, laced with salt from the harbor and something darker, the faint thrill of having survived what was meant to bury me. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Olivia. Just one text. You've ruined me. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering. Then I locked the phone. I didn't reply. Because I hadn't ruined her. She'd just finally run out of borrowed time. The call came just after sunrise. The sky outside was washed pale, a gray watercolor spilling over the harbor. I was still in my robe, coffee cooling on the counter, when Robert's number flashed on the screen. Margaret. No preamble. His voice was tight, urgent. We've got a problem. I gripped the edge of the counter. What kind of problem? Someone filed an amendment to Edward's will. Yesterday. It names Olivia Foster as the primary beneficiary of the Charleston property. The words felt like a slap, clean, stinging. That's not possible, I said. The trust is sealed. Apparently not, Robert said. Papers rustled on his end. The signature matches Edward's. Perfectly. I sat down at the kitchen table, the chair cold under my legs. A forgery. That's what I thought. I've already sent it to forensics. Coffee sloshed against the rim of my cup. And? He exhaled. It's a digital replica. Whoever did this used a high-resolution scan of Edward's signature and embedded it into a legitimate template. It looks real to the untrained eye. Hell, it almost fooled me. I closed my eyes. Rage wasn't a burst. It was a slow rising tide under my skin. Olivia had been humiliated at the gala, exposed. Now she was desperate enough to gamble everything. Robert's voice softened. You need to be prepared. This isn't just civil anymore. It's fraud. The DA's office is aware. I opened my eyes. Good. Later that morning, Andrew came by. He looked pale, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He stood in the doorway like a boy again, shoulders slumped, hands stuffed into his pockets. She says she didn't do it, he blurted before I could speak. She swears she had nothing to do with the amendment. I gestured for him to sit. And you believe her? He hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice cracked on the last word. I set my cup down. Andrew. Someone tried to steal a house with a piece of paper. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime. He stared at the floor. Do you know what it means? I continued quietly. To fake a will? To drag your father's name through court? To drag me? He didn't answer. Andrew. His eyes flicked up. For a moment I saw the boy who used to run down these halls, cheeks flushed from soccer, calling for his father. She said she was scared, he murmured, that she's losing everything. She's losing what never belonged to her, I said. He swallowed hard. The front door opened without a knock. Olivia stepped in like she still owned the air. She wore black this time. Slim dress, hair pinned tight, eyes rimmed dark like she hadn't slept. I didn't do it, she said, voice low. This amendment, it isn't me. Robert arrived just behind her, a manila folder under his arm. The DA will want to speak with you, he said briskly. Until then, Miss Foster, you're not to enter the Charleston property. It's evidence now. Olivia spun on him. You can't keep me out. Yes, Robert said. We can. She turned back to me. You think I'd forge a will? You think I'd risk prison? I held her gaze. I think you should have left well enough alone. For the first time since Edward's funeral, her mask cracked completely. Tears welled but didn't fall. Her hands trembled as she reached for her bag, then thought better of it. This is a setup, she whispered. Someone's setting me up. Andrew's face twisted. He didn't know which way to turn. Outside, a police cruiser rolled slowly past the house, its presence almost casual. Almost. Robert straightened the folder, then handed me a copy of the forged amendment. I'll be in touch, he said quietly. Olivia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, face draining, then shoved it back into her bag without answering. Stay away from me, she muttered, backing toward the door. Then she was gone. I stood at the window, the fake amendment in my hand, and watched her drive off into the pale morning. Somewhere between the paper and the key in my drawer, a bigger truth was waiting. And whoever had forged that, Will hadn't just drawn a line. They'd declared war. The camera crews came before noon. At first, it was one white van parked just past the gate, then two more by the curb, antennas telescoping skyward. I stood in the front window in a sweater I hadn't worn in years, watching them cluster like gulls. One reporter shouted something as I opened the door to retrieve the mail, but I didn't answer. They already had their headline. Forged widow? One of the tabloids blared. Charleston heiress accused of estate fraud. By midday, a drone buzzed low over the backyard. I called the police, but they only shrugged. It was public airspace. Inside, I kept the curtains drawn. The house felt too large, too quiet, like it was waiting to be claimed by someone else. I ran my fingers over the carved banister as I climbed the stairs, solid oak, original, and tried not to feel like an intruder in my own home. Around 2, there was a knock at the back entrance. I opened it to find Olivia. No makeup, no jewelry, just a faded sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose braid that made her look younger than I'd ever seen her. She held no purse, no lawyer's folder, just her hands, balled into fists at her sides. Please, she said. I need to talk. I didn't move. You shouldn't be here. I know. Her voice wavered. But I didn't do this. Margaret, I swear to you, I didn't forge anything. Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for a ledge to hold on to. I stepped aside. We sat across from each other at the old kitchen table. She glanced around the room like it hurt to be back inside. I know how this looks, she said. And I know what you think of me. Maybe I deserve that. But I didn't fake that will. I don't even have the technical know-how. You had motive, I said quietly. She nodded. Yes. God, yes, but not desperation. Not insanity. I didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. I've done a lot of things I regret. Loving Edward wasn't one of them. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. I wouldn't give her that piece of me. Not again. She looked up. Help me, please. You have resources, people who still trust you. If you believe me, they might listen. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't know what I saw. A liar? A widow? Or just a woman caught in something she couldn't undo? She left the tea untouched. 10 minutes later, Andrew came by. She's not okay, he said the moment I opened the door. She's unraveling. I crossed my arms. That doesn't mean she's innocent. I'm not saying she is, he said, stepping inside. But Mom, she's broken. Completely. I've never seen her like this. We all break, I said, voice softer than I meant. But some of us rebuild. Some of us learn. He looked at me like he wanted to believe I was one of those people. I didn't tell him that earlier. That morning, I'd written a check for the full property taxes on the Charleston estate, signed it myself, drove it to the clerk's office, watched the seal go down on the receipt. I hadn't done it out of pride. I'd done it to prove the house was still mine. Legally, financially, in every way that mattered. And maybe, quietly, to remind everyone watching that some foundations don't crack under pressure. That evening, the tone of the media began to shift. A local columnist wrote a piece titled, "The Widow Who Stayed Quiet." It quoted me briefly, a line I hadn't realized was overheard, and called the will scandal a disrespect to a grieving family. Sympathy, slow and tentative, turned toward me. But just as I began to exhale, my phone lit up with a call from Robert. His voice was clipped. "You're going to want to sit down." I did. "They found something," he said. "Whoever forged that will. They used a printer from inside the Charleston house." My blood ran cold. "But no one's been inside since Edward died," I said. There was a beat of silence. "That's what we thought," Robert said, "until we checked the security footage." He paused. "And saw someone enter the study 3 nights ago." He came just after 9, long after the house had settled into silence. I was in the den, a glass of wine untouched on the side table, the fire low but still burning. The front door creaked open with the slow guilt of someone who didn't want to be heard. "Mom?" I turned. Andrew stood in the archway, pale and damp from the October mist. His jacket hung off him like it no longer fit. He didn't come in right away. Just stood there, shifting his weight like a boy about to admit to something he'd promised he'd never do again. "I need to talk to you," he said. I nodded once and gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, slowly, as if the weight of whatever he carried was still too much for his legs. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the rain began to tap against the windows. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared at the flames. Then, almost inaudibly, "I forged the amendment." My breath caught so fast it made a sound, a small, sharp inhale that felt like it tore something inside me. He didn't look up. His fingers were clenched between his knees. I thought. He stopped, swallowed. I thought if the house was hers, legally the worry would stop. The panic. "She's been unraveling, Mom." I didn't know what else to do. I stared at him, at the man in front of me, at the boy I raised, at the son who had somehow, somewhere, crossed a line so dark I didn't know how to follow. "She didn't know," he added quickly. "I swear to you. Olivia didn't ask for it, didn't even see it. I did it on my own. I found one of Dad's old templates in the files, and I used a scan from a legal brief. I thought it would look legitimate enough to calm her down, just for a while. Buy us time." I pressed my fingers against my temple like that could slow the pounding behind it. The fire crackled again. Somewhere, far away, a siren wailed. "You tried to steal your father's house?" "No," he said, anguished. "I tried to stop her from drowning. I thought, if she just had the house, she'd feel safe. She wouldn't spiral. I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying not to lose her completely." There was a quiet in the room that felt thick enough to choke on. I remembered Edward's study, the old printer tucked under the mahogany desk, the faint, sharp smell of toner that always made me sneeze. I remembered how careful Andrew had been as a boy, how good he was with computers. And I realized, with a kind of distant, painful clarity, that this wasn't a crime born of greed. It was born of fear and pride. The same pride that made Olivia pretend she was still standing tall. The same fear that made me keep every receipt, every deed, every tax record, like they could tether me to the past. We were all trying not to lose something. Robert called 20 minutes later. I stepped into the hallway to take it. Andrew sat motionless in the chair, eyes still fixed on the fire. "If this gets out," Robert said, low and blunt, "he's looking at felony charges. Forgery, fraud, maybe more. I can't spin that, Margaret. Not even close. I closed my eyes. The walls of the house felt too tight, like they were pressing inward. What do you want to do? Robert asked. I didn't answer. That night, I sat in the den long after Andrew had gone upstairs, the fire reduced to embers. The clock ticked softly. The wine glass still sat full beside me. On the mantel was a photo of Edward holding Andrew at 5 years old, both of them grinning, eyes crinkled, unaware of everything the world would one day ask them to carry. I could feel the decision closing in like fog off the harbor. Justice said, "Turn him in." Love said, "Not yet." I rose slowly and opened the drawer beneath the cabinet. Inside was the manila folder Robert had left, the fake amendment still tucked inside. I stared at it, then at the fire, then back. And then I picked up the folder and lit the match. The district attorney's office was tucked behind an aging municipal building, the kind of place where the walls smelled faintly of toner and dust, where the chairs in the waiting room still bore the imprint of decades-old grievances. I arrived just after 8, before the press could start sniffing around, before I had time to lose my nerve. I wore a coat that used to be Edward's, navy wool, warm at the collar. It gave me just enough weight to carry what I needed to say. The assistant DA, Catherine Locke, met me in a conference room with no windows. She was younger than I expected. Sharp eyes, sharp bob, the kind of woman who didn't believe in small talk or second chances. "You asked for a private meeting," she said, opening a notebook. "Off record?" I nodded. "I'm not here to interfere. I'm here to cooperate." She leaned back slightly. "Go on." I placed a different folder on the table, one with handwritten notes, photocopies, and a list of names that meant little to me but had come up when I scoured Edward's archived emails. Vendors, consultants, a former paralegal who left on bad terms. I'd done my homework. Created just enough ambiguity to invite a shadow. "I believe this forgery may have involved third-party access," I said calmly. "The house has had visitors over the years. Cleaners, tech repair, appraisers. Not everyone was vetted as closely as they should have been." She looked at me, unreadable. "You're suggesting someone else forged the amendment?" "I'm saying," I replied, measured, "that the paper trail leads beyond my family, and that I'm willing to testify to anything you need. Names, access logs, documents. But I'm not interested in dragging this through the mud any further. Neither is the estate." Locke studied me a long time, then glanced down at the list. "You're aware this doesn't absolve anyone. If the investigation leads elsewhere, we'll follow it." "I understand," I said. "But if you're asking whether I'm trying to protect someone I love, the answer is yes. And I suspect, deep down, you might understand that too." We left it there. 3 days later, Robert called. "It's done," he said. "The file's been closed quietly. Lack of sufficient evidence to pursue charges. No press, no trial." I exhaled. Not relief, just breath. That evening, Olivia showed up again. She looked different. Older, somehow, like time had moved faster on her face these past few weeks. She held a paper bag with wine, though neither of us reached for glasses. We sat on the back porch where the hydrangeas had finally gone dry. "I know it was you," she said softly. "Whatever you said to the DA, you kept him safe." I didn't respond. "Why help us?" she asked, voice low, almost brittle. The wind picked up from the bay, carrying salt and something colder beneath it. "Because," I said, "I remember what it's like to love a fool." She nodded, and this time no defenses rose behind her eyes, just weariness, and somewhere buried, shame. "You're a better woman than I thought." I looked out at the fading light over the water. The sky was turning that warm kind of gold that doesn't last. "No," I said. Just older. For the first time, she smiled, not the kind she used to wear like a weapon, but something small and almost human. She stood to leave, then hesitated. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, she admitted. I didn't answer. As she walked down the steps, her hand brushed the railing where Edward once carved our initials into the wood. Her fingers lingered there a second longer than they needed to. When the door closed behind her, I stayed on the side porch, watching the dusk settle. From upstairs, I heard Andrew's footsteps. A pause. Then the soft creak of his bedroom door. Everything had been spared, but nothing was untouched. I reached for the glass of wine I hadn't poured, then stopped. The harbor was quiet, but something, deep inside the house, wasn't. It was just past noon when Robert arrived. Unannounced, coat damp from rain, jaw set in that way I'd come to recognize as him bracing for impact. He didn't sit, just pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the kitchen table between us, like it might detonate. This, he said, was buried in a private trust Edward set up before he amended the will. I only found it because I started going through old tax documentation on the Langley Foundation's property filings. I opened it slowly. The seal was faint, worn from time. Inside, nestled between legal pages and dates I barely remembered, was a final clause. Edward had transferred the Charleston house, fully, legally, irrevocably, to me, effective 5 years from the date of his death, which was last week. I stared at the page, then up at Robert. He never told me. He told no one, Robert said. Not even me. My guess? He was trying to outmaneuver everyone. If the house went to you after 5 years, there'd be no legal grounds for anyone else to claim it. Not even Olivia. The silence felt thicker than shock. It felt like inevitability finally surfacing. I turned to the window. The harbor was slick and gray. A crane drifted low across the water. The market's already moving, Robert continued carefully. If you want to sell, we can have bids by end of week. Developers would pay millions. The land alone's worth that. I didn't respond. Upstairs, I could hear boxes being taped shut. Olivia and Andrew had started packing 2 days ago. They hadn't asked for help. They hadn't said goodbye. I rose from the table and took the folder with me. That evening, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not empty, exactly, but unclaimed. Olivia stood near the front door, suitcase by her side, hair pulled back tight. Andrew hovered behind her, eyes flicking between the stairwell and the floor, as if unsure where to land. I just want to know one thing, Olivia said. Her voice was calm, but too still. Will you fight us if we try to buy time? Just a few weeks. We'll figure something out. I promise. I didn't speak. I walked past her, down the hallway, and into the study. The folder was already waiting on Edward's desk, beside a fresh stack of lease papers I'd had drawn up that afternoon. I signed them quietly, then returned to the foyer. You're staying, I said. Both of you, as tenants. Olivia's mouth parted, confused. Tenants? I held up the lease. 1 year, modest rent. You'll pay on the 1st of each month. Utilities in your name. Lawn service in mine. She stared at the paper, blinking. You're letting us stay? I nodded. Not out of charity, not out of guilt. Then I stepped closer. I want you to remember, I said, voice low, whose roof you stand under. She swallowed. I saw something shift behind her eyes, not anger, not pride. Something closer to understanding. And maybe something that hurt. Andrew took the lease gently, glancing over the details, his jaw tightening with each line. Olivia's shoulders dropped. Thank you. She hesitated. Then, thank you, Mrs. Langley. It landed differently now. Not mockery, not performance, just the last piece of a mask falling. I nodded once and turned toward the stairs. As I climbed, I heard them standing in place, not leaving, not speaking, just adjusting to a reality they hadn't expected. At the top of the landing, I paused and looked back. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like mine. But just as I reached for the bedroom door, my phone buzzed on the side table. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice, calm and unfamiliar. Mrs. Langley, I'm calling on behalf of the Wilmington Probate Office. There's been a new claim filed against your late husband's estate. I stopped breathing. By who? I asked. The voice didn't waver. A woman named Elise Monroe. She says she has a child. Edward's child. By spring, the garden was blooming again. Not all at once. Nothing in this life ever is. But slowly, as if the soil itself had taken its time deciding whether to trust me again. The lavender came first, then the daffodils, soft and yellow and unbothered. I clipped them one by one, fingers dirt-streaked, knees aching but content. The harbor was quiet that morning. Even the gulls had stopped their bickering. I stood with shears in hand, basket hooked on my arm, when the mail truck pulled up. The driver, a young man with the beginnings of a beard, handed me a small stack. I thanked him, tucking the letters under my arm as I bent back to the rosemary. Inside the kitchen, I flipped through them with no urgency. Electric bill, catalog, a condolence note from a distant cousin who had just heard. And then, at the bottom, a thick envelope embossed with the Bank of Carolina seal. I opened it with the blade of a paring knife. Inside was a letter, not typed, handwritten, from the president of the board. Your personal donation bridged a shortfall that saved the historic preservation account. The community thanks you. My father would have too. I read it twice, then set it gently on the counter, beside the vase of fresh-cut stems. Upstairs, I heard Andrew sanding the window trim in the guest room. Olivia's footsteps passed back and forth. Paint cans, drop cloths, tools I hadn't seen touched in years. The house had stopped groaning in protest. Now it sounded like it was waking up. They hadn't asked to stay longer than the lease, but they hadn't left either. Last week, Andrew resealed the front porch. Olivia had scraped off the rusted brass plate from the mailbox and ordered a new one. It read, simply, Langley House. No first names, just permanence. The neighbors had started waving again. Some brought baked goods. One had asked me if I was giving house tours this summer, like I used to during the garden fundraiser. I said I wasn't sure, but I'd think about it. That afternoon, Robert stopped by. He looked well. The first signs of retirement softening the edges of a man who'd spent too long cleaning up after the very rich. He wore no tie, which in Robert's world might as well have been a midlife rebellion. We sat on the back steps, lemonade between us, the wind off the bay gentle for once. You handled vengeance like mercy, he said after a while, not looking at me. I let the words sit for a moment before answering. They're the same, I said quietly, when you choose the right weapon. He chuckled, low and warm. You ever think of running for judge? I already serve a life sentence, I said, smiling. He didn't argue. We talked a little about Elise Monroe. The estate inquiry had been delayed. No DNA, no formal filing yet. Just noise and smoke and whispers in legal corridors. Robert was watching it carefully. But for now, there was no threat. Just the possibility of one. As the sun began to dip, he stood to leave. I followed him to the front door, watching him descend the same steps Edward used to grumble about every time his knee acted up. The wind picked up again. Behind me, the old brass wind chimes swayed gently, still hanging from the porch beam, untouched since the funeral. Edward's favorite. 3 notes, tuned to a chord he always said reminded him of home. I hadn't been able to bear the sound of it before. Now, I let it play. For the first time in months, I smiled, Not because everything was fine, but because somehow it was finally whole. And just as I turned to go back inside, the phone rang from the study. A landline, one no one ever used. And I knew, before I picked it up, that peace never really arrives. It just asks how long you're willing to defend it. 1 year later, the house was loud again, but not with conflict. Laughter floated from the kitchen like music. Pots clattered in the sink. Someone was shouting for more ice. A toddler shrieked with delight out on the lawn, chasing bubbles through the garden I'd brought back from near death. I stood at the edge of the hallway, barefoot on the cool tile, watching it all without needing to participate. That was the luxury age granted you, presence without performance. Andrew had brought friends from Charleston, and Olivia, to her credit, had set the table herself. Long white linens, freshly pressed, hydrangeas in mason jars. No flair, no scene, just care. She'd even cooked. Well, the peach tart had nearly made Robert cry. I passed through the room slowly, checking on the roast, adjusting a plate here, a glass there. They let me float like that. Not a host exactly, but a figure at the center of it all. No one asked what I needed. For the first time in years, I didn't need anything. Just after dessert, Olivia found me alone on the back porch, where the wind was warm and the moon had begun to rise just over the waterline. She held a slender box in both hands. "No occasion," she said. "I saw it last month and I don't know. I kept thinking about that day, the funeral." I didn't flinch. She opened the box gently and held it out. Inside, folded with care, was a deep blue dress. Simple, elegant. No frills. Just clean lines and quiet confidence. "It reminded me of the one you wore that morning," she said softly. "Except this one. This one suits you better." I reached for it slowly, running my fingers across the fabric. It was cool to the touch, heavier than it looked. "You hated that dress," I said. She smiled faintly. "I did?" A beat passed between us. Not long, not tense. Just honest. "And I was awful," she added, her voice smaller. "To you. That morning. And after." I said nothing. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because some truths don't need answering. Only acknowledgement. I folded the dress over my arm. "This one does suit me better," I said. We stood side by side, listening to the voices inside. The sound of glasses clinking, chairs scraping, someone laughing too loudly. It was, for once, the right kind of noise. Inside, Andrew raised a glass. I saw him through the open French doors, already halfway into a speech I hadn't agreed to. "To mothers," he said, locking eyes with me. "And to second chances. We didn't always deserve them, but we got them. And that means something." He turned to Olivia. She nodded, raised her own glass. Others followed. I lifted mine quietly, the blue dress still folded neatly over my other arm. We didn't cheer. We didn't make a show of it, but we drank, gently, together. And the silence that followed was more intimate than applause. As the last of the sun melted into the sea, the Charleston house glowed golden. Light poured in through every open window, catching dust motes midair like confetti. The wind chime on the porch swayed once, then stilled. Later, after everyone had left and the plates had been washed and stacked, I stood in the bedroom alone, holding the new dress against my frame. It fit. Not just in size, but in spirit. It didn't beg for approval. It didn't shout. It knew who it was. I smiled at myself in the mirror, just slightly. Down the hall, I heard Olivia closing her door for the night. Quiet. Measured. No slamming. I walked to the window and looked out at the lawn. Green. Alive. Still warm from the day's sun. This was my house now. Every room. Every silence. Every memory. She mocked my dress that day, but she lives under my roof, and I've never worn power more gracefully.